Welcome back to the channel. What we have right here is the Samsung Galaxy A71, which is essentially the phone you'd be buying if you want a high-end Samsung phone that doesn't cost $1,000. And this one surprisingly costs significantly less than the Galaxy S series. Being the most premium of the Galaxy A series, this one's selling at just under $400, and yet it still has 5 cameras on this phone. It has a very large screen, very long battery life, and a lot of really impressive features that make it definitely worthy of consideration when you're looking for a mid-range phone. And honestly, I would say a lot of people are excited about the Galaxy A51, but I would say this phone is probably the most underrated mid-range phone on the market today, especially because there's so much attention being given to the iPhone SE and to the Pixel 3a that I think a lot of people should really be considering this one, especially if you want that larger display, that really long battery life, and extra cameras on the back of the phone. So in this video, we'll be diving into this to figure out if this phone is actually as capable as it looks, or if they just packed in a lot of specs without actually backing them up. So I'll be testing this phone out for the speaker test, doing a camera test, a battery test, showing you everything you need to know about this phone before you consider buying it. So starting off with a physical tour of this phone, I want to start off on the back because it is really similar to the Galaxy S20 in so many aspects. The first one being the camera bump, and there are 5 cameras on this phone. 4 of them are on the back. You really only use 3 of the ones on the back. The other one's a depth camera. And going through them, you have an ultra-wide angle lens that's 12 megapixels. You have 64 megapixel primary shooter, and then you have a 5 megapixel macro lens. Kind of weird that a lot of budget phones are adding macro lenses on there. I don't know why they're doing that, but I'll talk about the cameras later on in this video. And of course, we also have the depth sensing camera there. You really won't be taking pictures with that. Instead, it'll be an assistant camera that you'll be using for like AR doodle and measuring, stuff like that. Now, something you'll notice is that there is also a flash, of course, but this doesn't have a microphone on the camera bump. This will affect your video quality or your audio quality really in your videos. And so instead, you'll be using the microphones on the top or the bottom of this phone when you're taking videos. Keep that in mind when I do the video test later on in this review. Now on the back, we do have a very large plastic back. Some people are worried about this not feeling premium. Honestly, it does feel pretty premium. It looks premium and has some really cool colors there. I think if it's sitting on a table, you wouldn't necessarily suspect that it's plastic because it is really high gloss. It looks a lot like glass. And it does have aluminum rails around the side of this phone, so it feels very premium in your hand, and it almost feels similar to a glass back phone, except of course when you're tapping on it, you can tell it's plastic, but it doesn't flex or really do anything that a lot of other plastic phones do. Now, something missing on the back of this phone is the wireless charging. It doesn't have wireless charging on the back. It's unfortunate because you do have such a large space right there. But going around the edges of this phone, you'll see on the bottom, we do have 25-watt fast charging by USB Type-C on the bottom. I really like to see that, and it is actually included in the box. We have our super fast charger there, which again is something that a lot of even mid-range premium phones don't even come with that. So it's nice that they have that on this one. Next to the USB Type-C, we have a headphone jack. I know a lot of people are going to be really excited to see that in here. And actually, there are quite a few other things in this phone that you don't see in the Galaxy S20, for example. Of course, we have the speaker on the other side, a microphone on the bottom, a microphone on the top of this phone. And on the right side, we have our side key and our volume rocker. And so this is the same layout that we saw on the Galaxy S20. Probably going to see the same layout on the Note 20. Samsung's adopting this layout of all the keys on one side. I'm not a big fan of that. It's harder to take screenshots. It's harder to use the buttons. I really like them on either side there. But the side key, again, has the same remapping functions you have on the S20, where there is single, double, triple press, or tap and hold, or press and hold. And you can remap either the double press or the press and hold to open Bixby, open your camera, power off your phone, or open some other app of your choice. And that's all in the software on the One UI 2.0 in here. I'll talk about software later on in this video, but essentially that's everything looking at this phone physically, besides on the left side, something really cool in the SIM tray that's not just a standard SIM tray. It's a dual SIM tray, and it also has a slot for a microSD card. Now, this phone comes with 128 gigabytes of storage on board, but if that's not enough for you, you can add a microSD card on the little slot right there. And something that, again, this is something that even the S20 doesn't do. You have the option to have 2 SIMs and the expandable storage there, whereas on the S20, you could typically have either 2 SIMs or a SIM and a micro SD card. Now on the front, the very massive display here is something that you really can't miss. It's one of the highlights of this phone. When you see the advertisements, they talk about great camera, great battery, and great screen. Those are 3 things that this phone really accents, and I think the screen right here is without a doubt a very impressive screen. You have the in-screen fingerprint sensor on the bottom there. One difference is that it is not an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor like we see on the S20. The ultrasonic is definitely far superior. It's in a better location. You tap your finger on there, it's faster, it's more secure. This one is an optical one, and quite honestly, I think it's a little bit weak. It definitely struggles. It's better than last year's optical fingerprint sensors down here, but it's slower, it's less accurate. When I was registering, I had to try like 5 different times because you really have to get your thumb in exactly the right place. And even then, you have to hold it for a long time and press down. It's not my favorite fingerprint sensor, but it's nice to have it in the screen. The display itself is a 6.7-inch Infinity O Super AMOLED Plus screen from Samsung. And those are all very Samsung terms there. And to explain what they mean, so Infinity O just means that you have the hole punch camera on the top. I love having that in the center up there. Way better than notches, way better than bezels. And it's a little bit larger, this hole punch, compared to the S20 or the Note series or quite a few other phones, because again, it's just a budget model, so they saved a little bit of money by making that a larger hole punch camera on the front. Now the Super AMOLED Plus really is just the style of screen that Samsung made on this one, and so it's really bright and really vibrant, and I think they did a great job making this display look as good as it does on such a well-priced phone. Now of course there are some compromises, being that it's a $400 phone, and one of them is the resolution and the refresh rate. So we see on the newer phones like the S20 that we have 120 Hz refresh rate. This one is 60 Hz, and anybody buying a mid-range phone, odds are your previous phone was also 60 Hz, so you won't think that's a drawback at all. Now the overall resolution of this screen is 1080 by 2400, so it's not going to be the highest resolution, but 1080 is still pretty good. It's still better than the iPhones were even just a couple years ago. Bezels on the front are quite minimal, and yet the screen doesn't wrap over the edges, which some people might really like because you don't have that palm rejection problem, something that you see with like the Galaxy S10, for example. A nice flat screen here, it's good to see that you know, you don't have to worry about palm rejection. Now, talking about the cameras on this phone, I mentioned what the megapixel count was on each of them, but let's get into a camera test now to see how well they actually function. All right, so this is the front-facing camera shooting in 4K right now. It has pretty good stabilization. The color, I think, is a little bit light on the saturation. Things look a little bit flat, but comment down below and let me know how this sounds and how this looks. Now, this is the rear-facing camera. One thing you'll note is that I can zoom in like this, but I cannot actually zoom out to the other lens, to the ultra-wide angle lens. Instead, you can only zoom in when you're shooting with this lens right here. Now, if I wanted to shoot with the ultrawide lens, I would have to pause or stop the video and then start a new video with the ultrawide lens right here. But I think this one actually does a significantly better job than the cheaper versions of the A series. Now, getting into the photography here, you'll see the wide angle. Overall, the skin tones look pretty good. I look a little bit unsaturated, but the ultrawide angle, I look slightly redder. Otherwise, they do a pretty good job capturing color, very sharp images. You can see the ultrawide doesn't have a whole lot of distortion in the edges, and then the wide angle captures a lot of color, has a really great sharpness. And I think for $400, it's a great camera. You can see 64 megapixel wide angle here. The shadows are a little darker, but it still looks really good. And actually, interestingly enough, if you crop in on a 64 megapixel photo, it's actually sharper than if you just zoomed in before you took the photo. Now, getting into a dark environment here, you'll see the wide angle struggled a little bit in a dark setting, but as soon as we go to night mode, it brightens it right up. Not a whole lot of noise, and I think the picture looks pretty good, captures color decently. The ultra wide angle lens, however, struggled a lot more with darkness. Looks really bad right here before night mode. Even with night mode, it doesn't capture color very well, and the door behind actually looks pretty greenish there. Now, looking at the wide angle live focus mode, the depth cameras did a great job of detecting that the mint plant next to me was close to me, and I think it looks pretty good. Now, with the front-facing live focus mode, it struggled a little bit more with edge detection, specifically on my hair. Getting into the fingerprint sensor, you'll see here that the fingerprint sensor works if you know what you're doing. I get used to it, but on first setting it up, I found that it was kind of a weird location low on the screen, and you also have to tap and hold there for a pretty significant amount of time. If you tap it very briefly, it doesn't let you sign in, and as you can see, the green light show up around my thumb. That's actually an optical fingerprint sensor, not an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor. Now, getting into a speed test for this phone, I'll just open a couple apps. You'll see I closed all the other apps just to make this test. Opening Spotify, it was fairly quick, and honestly, I wouldn't say that's slow by any means. The Snapdragon 730 does an excellent job of opening Instagram right here, and the average user won't find any delay with this at all. All right, so for a quick audio test, I'm just going to play a video real quick. These speakers don't have a ton of bass, but they definitely get pretty loud. Now, talking about the internal components and the software of this phone, it has a Snapdragon 730 processor in there, which is honestly pretty quick, very snappy. For most people, you're not going to notice any kind of lag in this. It's very responsive, unless you're trying to maybe export large videos or edit photos really advanced on here, or play some very intense games on this phone. Then you might notice that it's maybe not the quickest phone out there. Obviously, it's not going to be at the same level as the Snapdragon 865, but for the most part, I was very impressed with the processor they put in this phone. Now, it has options for 6 GB or 8 GB of RAM, so for most people that should easily be enough. You have 128 GB of storage, which is way more than what most people will need for photos, and again, you have expandable storage if that's not enough for you. And then on top of that, you do have, and it's obviously running Android, and it has Samsung's One UI 2.0 on here. All right, so let's get into the pros and cons to figure out if this is actually the phone for you. Now, starting off with the pros, the screen on this is really incredible. It's very bright, very vibrant, easy to see, and it's such a large screen for a phone at this price point. I think that's really an incredible thing to have for if you're trying to, get basically a premium phone for under $400. The screen is going to be a big part of that, quite literally in this sense right here. Now, on top of that, it does actually have a screen protector included on there when you get it out of the box. That's really nice. You don't have to buy one and apply it and have bubbles all over it. It honestly has a pretty great battery. 4,500 milliamp hours is going to make this phone last quite a long time, easily throughout an entire day for most people. The price is a huge pro, obviously being under $400. The ultra-wide camera and having the macro camera, all the different cameras, I think is pretty nice to have on a budget phone. They were not perfect. I think I would rather see one really, really good camera. This also has FM radio with wired headphones. I think that's a cool feature they added on here if you use the headphone jack, which headphone jack is another big pro for a lot of people. And lastly, it has dual SIM with the microSD card slot. I think it's a really cool pro that you have on this phone, which makes it overall a really easy to recommend phone. It's very robust and pretty much universal for most users, but there are a couple cons. So the one is going to be the in-screen fingerprint sensor is not really perfect. The second one is that it does have facial recognition, but it's based on the camera, which means that it's definitely not the most secure in that sense. I think for most people, you would probably be best either using a pattern or a pin, but if you are able to maybe register 2 or 3 fingerprints in the fingerprint sensor, you might be getting by all right with that. Now, the macro lens, I think, is kind of a waste of space. It's something I've never used, and I can't really picture it being especially useful for most people unless you're selling like really tiny things, maybe on eBay, I guess. But otherwise, more drawbacks. It doesn't have a good IP rating. It actually doesn't have an IP rating at all, which means we can't really get this wet with any confidence that it would stay protected from the water. And on top of that, it doesn't have wireless charging, and the button layout is not my favorite. Now, all of those might seem little like nitpicky things, which to some extent they kind of are. Maybe they bother some people more than others. But I think in conclusion, this phone is really, really impressive. I'm really glad to see Samsung's going hard after that $400 mid-range price phone that feels like a premium phone, but doesn't cost $1,000. I think for most people, this might be the perfect phone to get if you're just looking for an well-rounded phone. So guys, I will be comparing this phone to the iPhone SE and the Pixel 4a in the near future. If you want to see those, make sure you go down and click the subscribe button. If you like this video, please remember to like, comment, share it with a friend. As always, guys, thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.